Welcome to our webinar, Note-Taking Process that Improves Grades and How to Teach It with Glean. This webinar is hosted by the Network of Assistive Technologists on this Friday, the 8th of April, 2022. Glean's marketing manager, Charles Haig, is known for creating useful and timely resources, but only through the engagement with those of us who are supporting the students. And Jenna Huckle is Glean's contact for North American customers. Through training, advising, and planning, Jenna lives up to her title of Customer Success Manager, working with the learning professionals and the students that they support. And I'd like to welcome Charles and Jenna today and thank them for joining us. And I want to hand over the presentation or the screen sharing to you and let you begin today's workshop.
Thank you so much, Doug. Hopefully everyone is seeing my slides there. So yeah, let's get started. Thank you everyone so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to be back with N.O.A.T again. I think it's a couple of years since we've actually managed to speak to you in a webinar like this. Thank you, again, Doug, for that introduction. I'll just start by letting you guys know a little bit more about who we are and what we'll be getting up to on the workshop today. So my name is Charles, and in my role at Glean, I spend a lot of time speaking to people in the note-taking community, as well as working with our internal learning experts to understand how we can support best practice. I'll be acting as a host for today's event, and also taking some time to introduce you to the note-taking theory that sits behind our method. And yes, I'm really happy to be joined by my colleague Jenna. So Jenna works day to day, day in, day out, training those who work with students across the US and Canada, helping them create better learners and support student success. She'll be taking you through how to train learners on the CORI process, and then doing a quick demonstration as a worked example in the Glean tool itself. And I'm sure many of you know each other already, but if you haven't already, definitely post in the chat letting me know who you are, and I'd love to know a bit about your role in supporting students as well. That would be great. And as you've gathered, I'm sure, we both work, Jenna and I both work for a company called Glean based in the UK. You can probably tell by my accent. If anyone hasn't heard of us, you may have heard of us under our older name Sonocent, but we've been working to help organisations support students for around 15 years now. And we're incredibly proud to have become a leading voice in the conversation about learning and note-taking. So let's start by just having a look at what we're going to cover. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about why we believe note-taking is one of the most important skills to focus on when supporting students. Then I'll play a video presentation by Glean's own Catherine Hamilton to introduce our note-taking process, CORI. And then for around the second half of this workshop, Jenna will share her recommendations for teaching any student the CORI process, regardless of what technology they might have, before showing you a worked example in Glean itself. We're keen for this to be interactive where possible. We have about an hour and a half together, so do feel free to post questions throughout in the chat. We'll take pauses between the sections and answer a few questions that have come in there, and there'll also be time at the end, of course. So let's start with a question, in fact. Why focus on note-taking? Well, the fact is, it's one of the most important skills for learning. Yet, at the same time, it's also one of the most neglected and one of the hardest to master. Let's take a look at why. It's a proven fact that note-taking that taking notes and reviewing notes supports learning. As humans, we aren't really that good at absorbing information. When taking notes by hand, the average note taker still only comes away with about 35% of the information from class. So consider then how little is retained if no notes are actually taken at all. Furthermore, returning to notes, especially if you do this multiple times, improves the recall of information. And it's therefore no surprise that studies have found that a 12% increase in academic performance amongst those who do take notes in class. And whilst 12% might not seem like a huge jump, remember that could very easily be the difference between one or more grade boundaries. When done well, great note-taking can have an incredibly positive impact on students' experience of learning. Through our work, we've seen increased confidence, far more independent learners, and ultimately the better grades that open up further opportunities for students. And that's sort of the framing of today's workshop. How do we give students the ability to access those better grades, which then set them up for success in later life as well? But we've spoken to lots of students, and generally the experience of note-taking is far from positive. It's not like those kind of three things that I just discussed on the previous slide. And here are just a few examples of the things that students have told us. We see distraction, we see stress caused by multitasking, we see confusion over what to make notes of in the moment, and we see issues caused by processing challenges. So one thing that sits behind a lot of this negative experience is something called the note-taker's dilemma. This is a phrase that's been coined by Glean to describe the challenges faced by all learners in the classroom. Should I focus on creating a complete record of class, or should I engage in the moment? Now, the fact is both of those activities are really valuable. The first creates that really strong record of class that you can then return to. But it stops you from doing the second, which is engaging with the teacher and other learners. And that is what helps you build connections and boost your understanding of the content that you're consuming. I'd love at this point, just to get some insight from you guys, as people who work really closely with students, do you feel that note-taking is taught effectively through K-12? Do you have examples of it being taught well? Do you have examples of it not being taught so well? So if you're willing to, drop in the chat any thoughts that you have around how note-taking is actually taught through K-12. And we'll see those come in. Because our research suggests that there is actually a huge skills gap when it comes to note-taking. Studies have found that nearly 59% of first-year college students feel underprepared for post-secondary studies, and note-taking is a big contributor to this. And the fact is, it's not even a problem that goes away, it persists. We surveyed over 900 students, and only 34% of those said that they use their notes to study and prepare for exams. Another big contributing factor that we need to consider here is a phenomenon called that we refer to as information overload, and you're probably very aware of this. As we've established, processing information through note-taking is vital for learning. But if a student becomes overwhelmed by information, they're doomed from the start. And alongside this, we have to recognize that learning environments have changed. Doug and Jenna and I were actually having a conversation about this before we started, but there has definitely been a move back to in-person classes. In fact, we saw that around 90% of colleges were intending or did return to in-person classes through the spring semester. But regardless, the last 2 years have shown us that the education and learning environments do have to be ready to adapt. Furthermore, learning, as we all know, doesn't just happen in the classroom now. More and more digital and online resources play an important role in building knowledge. However, the fact is often the online environment can actually exacerbate the problems around information overload and make note-taking even harder. To give a bit more insight into this, I'm going to play a short clip now from a presentation by Dr. Sue Wilkinson. So she's an expert in cognitive science who we've worked with to understand the cognitive processes behind learning. And here she's going to give a quick, a few minutes just discussing the pressures placed on the cognitive processes by digital content.
My name is Dr. Sue Wilkinson. I'm a cognitive psychologist. In this short presentation, I'm going to take you through the science behind why there are parts of blended learning that students struggle with and why there are skills that they don't seem to have. It's useful to understand this so we can kind of better appreciate how we can plug the skills gap that we're currently facing. So as students currently find themselves in more technology-rich environments with more technology within their immediate reach, they will have a higher preference for task switching, and they will struggle to sustain their attention on one task. So many students actually fall into the category of high media multitaskers. What this means is that they're engaging in more than one form of media at any given time. So for example, they may be listening to the radio whilst they're searching the internet for an assignment information. They might be also replying to an email at the same time, and also maybe checking for notices about exams or assignments. So that's what we mean by high media multitaskers. So they're doing more than one thing within media at any given time. So this means that they're going to be using up very limited cognitive resources searching for non-relevant information in their environment. So they might be trying to listen to their online lecture while they're also writing their assignment, whilst they're also catching up on something on social media. So not only will they recall very little content from their lecture, but the quality of their assignment is also likely to be compromised. So this type of behaviour will definitely impact on their learning and their education. So research shows that high levels of media multitasking can actually have a very negative effect on academic studies, and it can increase the likelihood of students being very distracted. So why is this? Well, people who regularly engage with multiple forms of media simultaneously have what we call a stimulus-driven attentional bias. And this basically means that their brain is always on the lookout for new information from their environment, regardless of whether that information is relevant to the task in hand or not. So they may fail to consider alternative possibilities when they're occupied with an existing train of thought. So they're going to struggle to pay attention. And they're going to find it harder to process and retain information. Low media multitaskers tend to be much better at directing their attention to task relevant information, allowing them to focus on a single task. So having to juggle our attention when learning online is actually a lot more complicated for our cognition than it may first appear to be.
So hopefully that gives a bit of insight into the cognitive processes that sit behind students' ability to take notes in different environments. And it's therefore not surprising that we discovered that 45% of students admit that they don't really take notes at all with online content. They rely purely on the recording itself, but which is okay. But the majority then went on to admit that they also never really go back to it. So something's not really working in this kind of blended environment when it comes to note taking. And the unfortunate truth is that for decades, there hasn't really been an effective remedy to the note-taker's dilemma. You've always had to sacrifice either creating a full record of class or engaging in the moment. And whilst I was playing, I was looking through some of the feedback in the comments, and there's Maris here agreeing with that dilemma, saying that she's kind of experiencing it, or he's apologies if I've got the gender wrong there, experiencing it right now. And also people talking about not being taught, or a few examples of actually good practice being taught around shorthand and things. So it is a mixed issue, but certainly a lot of empathy for that kind of experience of trying to take notes in the moment. And it has been the way for decades, for sure. But in recent years, we've spotted that things have started to change, and there's a good reason for that. And that is technology. We've just heard how kind of technology can actually make the situation harder in terms of information overload. Well, let's now think about the positive impact that technology actually has in the classroom around note-taking. Technology has created a whole host of new ways for students to engage and process information for learning. The class no longer happens just once. We can record content, we can replay it, we can manipulate it for our own needs. The pandemic accelerated blended learning, it accelerated digital transformation for many. And whilst we are, as we said, now seeing a return to the classroom in many cases, the option of accessing content online will remain there for many people, and it will continue to do so, and will probably now continue to actually grow. And certainly in terms of the sophistication of online content will continue to grow. There's a whole array of technology now, from captioning services to lecture capture, audio note-taking, and many more that mean that content is truly more accessible than ever. And that's where CORI comes in, this process that we're going to be talking about today. It's the scaffolded note-taking process that supports learning in the modern classroom. It makes use of technological advances with a focus on facilitating and aiding those cognitive processes that we've just seen. And by the end of today's workshop, our aim is that you're going to be able to teach CORI to your students, regardless of what kind of technology that they have access to. So let's dive into it in more detail and learn more about it. So to introduce what CORI is, the learning science behind it, I'm going to play a video now from Catherine Hamilton. So Catherine is one of our internal learning experts. Sadly, she couldn't be here tonight, otherwise she would have been here live, but she's actually currently traveling back from the ASU GSV conference in San Diego. However, I really wanted her to share this, so I asked her to record this in advance before she left. So I'm going to hand over to Catherine now, and she will take us through what CORI is from a kind of theoretical standpoint.
Hi there, I'm Catherine Hamilton and I'm the head of brand at Glean. I'm passionate about learning, so it's really lucky that my role at Glean is predominantly focused on how we can actively improve our learning knowledge and expertise as a company, so that we can be more effective as a learning solution, but also so we can better serve learners of all abilities. Before coming to Glean, I worked in higher education in access and inclusion, as well as academic support. So I've been able to marry my knowledge of what it's like working in a higher education institution, working with learners, but also how we can create innovative edtech solutions for learning. And I'm here today to tell you about the learning expertise that we have here and how it has contributed to the development of our solution. So Glean is the only note-taking app designed specifically to improve learning. At its heart is a learning process called CORI, which is built upon leading learning and cognitive theory. I'm going to spend some time in this video explaining CORI, but first I want to give you a snapshot of the learning theory that underpins it and the people and organisations who have lent us their expertise over the last 10 years as we've worked on our note-taking for learning solutions. For the past decade, we've been part of a rich conversation about learning, the role of note-taking and its process, as well as the cognitive science of supporting learners, especially learners of different abilities. Throughout that time, we've worked with a series of educational affiliations, including AHEAD, CAST and EDUCAUSE, as well as specialists from a variety of different learning backgrounds. And that's included Charlotte Crowther, who is a specialist at building a second brain, which looks at how we can improve the way we take notes, but also how we can then learn from that information. As well as Dr. Sue Wilkinson, a specialist at the Higher Education Academy, who is a neuroscientist and assistive technology expert. We've worked with John Hicks, who is a dyslexia advocate and UK learning consultant as part of the Studying with Dyslexia blog. We've worked with Louis Lord Nelson, who is a leading UDL expert and has authored the book Design and Deliver around how we can improve the learning within different learning environments. As well as Monica Burns, who is an EdTech consultant and influencer who looks at different class tech tips and how technology can serve every single learner within the classroom. So we really have been able to enrich our own knowledge through a huge variety of experts in the industry. There's also a vast number of academic research articles and journals that have added to our understanding and the development of our own technology. And I'm going to dive now into some of the most interesting takeaways from that academic research. And I'll start with the SAW model. SAW has inspired how we scaffold our note-taking for learning process. It's been developed by Dr. Kenneth Chiera, who specifically looked to improve how we can reinforce learning in different learning environments. And I really, really recommend having a look at all the different research articles and books that Dr. Kenneth Chiera has published. The SAW process considers the variables that affect attention in the classroom, or that sensory memory that we have in the environment that we're in, and how that in turn can influence working memory, as well as our sort of short-term and long-term retrieval of information, and how ultimately that is then applied to the application of that knowledge collected from class. So the SAW model looks at the whole experience, not just in the classroom, but the learning journey that is created afterwards. And one element I really wanted to unpick is the encoding storage paradigm. And this paradigm is central to how we at Glean teach the importance of note-taking as part of a wider learning process. It's really enriched how we look at the retrieval of knowledge from the notes that are taken in class. So if we were to break down this process, we'd start by encoding information, which is achieved through the physical act of processing and categorizing what is said in class, or effectively deciding what is important and then choosing to note it down. And that's all happens in the classroom or lecture environment. It happens in the moment. The second part of this paradigm, the storing of information, comes in the review of notes and is an extension of the categorization done in the moment. And it allows us to retain that information both in our working memory and the long-term retrieval. And it helps us to make connections between everything that we're learning, that we're storing. So that means that both taking notes and reviewing them later are equally important. But how many students do you talk to who actively go back and review their notes after every single class? I was definitely guilty of taking reams of notes in class, being a very conscientious note taker, but then actually not using my notes until about a month before my exam when I deemed them to be important. But actually, the encoding and storage part of this paradigm need to work in tandem within quite a short window of time. So using those two elements together, we've created a process that helps learners to get the most from the information in class. And that's by using CORI, which scaffolds this encoding storage paradigm within a window of time that makes that information really relevant to the learner. So CORI stands for capture, organize, refine, and integrate. And following this process from start to finish takes the students all the way from receiving information in class through to creating useful, rich study materials, which can be used to prepare more effectively for assessments. Before we go through each step in detail, let's take a look at why CORI works. Well, the CORI process is a direct solution to the problem faced by learners that Charles has discussed in the first part of this session. CORI solves the note-taker's dilemma and creates a process whereby students can overcome information overload in class. It also encourages students to review notes, a step which we know to be vital to learning as part of that encoding storage paradigm. CORI also makes use of technology in a way that other models like SAW don't. It's designed to be used alongside the tools available to students in the modern classroom, and I'll touch upon how that is achieved through CORI in a minute. We've come a really long way in terms of learning technology, and so we need to now adapt learning processes to reflect that and the unique application of those skills using technology. But most importantly, the reason CORI works is that it's simple. It's simple to remember and simple to follow in the technology itself. It breaks the note-taking process down into 4 distinct phases, which encourages a focus on the most important aspects at the right time. So, without further ado, let me dive into each stage of CORI, starting with capture. So, capture is probably the part of the process that we're all very familiar with and probably reasonably comfortable with. And it's where the learner focuses on class without missing what they need for later. They effectively take down the information that is relevant in the moment. But in order to do this effectively, to capture effectively, they need to have the space to engage and start note-taking to be returned to later. And this is where using technology is genuinely helpful in the classroom, because it allows the learner to buy back time and to take this stage of capture at their own pace. And in fact, most students think they can take notes in class and that's it. But it's hard to think about the meaning, take notes, listen, and participate in the moment all at the same time. It's tied into that note-taker's dilemma. And it's especially hard when you're increasing the cognitive challenges that are all involved in hybrid learning environment, the effect that that has on your attention span, and the way in which you're juggling multiple tasks at a time. So in the capture part of the CORI process, we want to encourage learners to do 3 things when they're taking notes. We want them to react, we want them to respond, and we want them to record. So as part of capture, we want learners to engage in class and capture all the information they need, but that doesn't mean take all the notes in the moment. It just means to focus on noting down whether the information can be categorized in these ways. Is it important? Do they understand? What is it related to? Does it prompt any further questions or thoughts? And actually, is there something technical there that needs to be understood? Is there data, or are there sources to consider? And this is true of any subject. And what this means is, if you can label your notes at a capture stage, you can then return to them and refine that information later. So you're simply reacting, responding, and recording in the moment. So in Glean, for example, I'm sure you'll see in a minute, but you would capture audio so you can engage fully in class. So the audio itself is that full record, but then you can react in the moment and make sure that you're labeling audio in a way that makes your notes relevant without them being a distraction. So once you've captured your notes, you then need to be able to organize them and put some structure into how you're using your notes to study. And ultimately, being able to find information is crucial, because if you want to overcome information overload, you need to be able to collate all the key information together so you have a single source of truth. And this is really key in that encoding and storage part of the paradigm. You're going to be doing this phase of organize across those 2 elements to really make the most of your sort of cognitive challenges that are happening. So At this stage, you really want to find the information you've captured from slides to images, audio, video, and text, and you need to be able to reuse it. So the organisation stage is all about understanding how that information can be used. Because ultimately, if you can't find it when you need it, it's going to be useless, which is why students who have reams of notes often don't find them useful because they're quite daunting. They haven't highlighted information in the most effective way. But that information also needs to be categorized so that you can draw connections and tap into your working memory. And these could be key themes, classes, or even assessment-based categories. You also need to identify tasks so you can ease the stress on your executive functioning skills. Because if you know you have something to do but don't know what it is or when it is for, or even from which class it came from, you're ultimately going to be stuck. That information is useless to you. So that's why the organisation stage goes between the encoding and storage part of the paradigm, because you're encoding information in that you're labeling it in your head, you're understanding what it's for, but the storage is there in order for you to access it later, for you to refine your knowledge. So this is really key. After organise, and perhaps most importantly in the whole of the learning process, is refine, whereby you would revisit and refine your information to extract all of its value. So this is where the learner would create personal, meaningful summaries of the concepts that they've been taught and consider all the multimedia sources available to them. And this perhaps is where refine and technology create a different experience for the learner. Ultimately, the learner is setting out to reduce information overload by refining their notes to only what matters. So a learner should navigate their notes using their system of organisation to summarise and then strengthen their understanding with additional research, but only to the gems that they've highlighted at the capture stage, so when they have initially encoded that information. So this is where note-taking can have the biggest impact on learning, especially when a learner has to juggle multiple pieces of multimedia. So you can have the space to reflect on just the key parts and consider how it connects to what you already know. So the learner now needs to evaluate lots of different mediums of information. It could be the audio itself, it could be slides and images, it could be some sort of online resource. There are so many different varieties of multimedia now that a learner can access through their LMS, through their course content, or even through additional research. So learners need the tools to refine at their own pace and retain only what they've identified as important. And as they're doing this, they'll create summaries in a form that is most meaningful and accessible to them. And this is where the principles of UDL really come into play, because as part of universal design of learning, you want to provide all learners with all the abilities the option to create different forms of expression or different forms of engagement with these summaries. So it could be that they lean heavily on using memes and GIFs and other forms of popular cultural references to really add meaning. It could be that they bring in lots of different definitions from different sources, or it could be simply that they record everything through audio because they're an auditory learner. So there are lots of things to consider at this point, but really it's about the 3 R's. It's reducing, reflecting, and refining as part of a wider refinement. So we've just had refine. Finally, learners then need to integrate the content they have captured and refined into their studies and assessments. And this is the very end of a process, but is the part that's always overlooked. So you may have learners who already capture information in a way that they're comfortable with. They may have different modes of organising it, and they may actually refine their understanding as they're going along. But do they then effectively integrate and apply that understanding into their studies? Well, actually, most of the time, that isn't the case. And what we found is that learners can use the multiple means of expression to create different ways of integrating that understanding into their studies. So they might use mind maps, create flashcards, introduce into essay frameworks pieces of knowledge that they didn't have previously. They might create presentations or videos or even podcasts. You name it, there is a form of expression that can help apply and integrate that understanding. It could even be that they integrate their notes into other EdTech tools within the ecosystem, like your LMS, for example. Ultimately, these study resources and further tools will aid further study. And the crucial thing is that they reflect and understand the best way to apply that information, to transform it into knowledge, to integrate it. So that was CORI. But as I said before, one of the best things about CORI is that it makes use of technology in the modern classroom. It's taken all the different learning methodologies that we've used within our research and it has applied it to technological and digital learning environments. I'm sure you can see now that using technology can help greatly, especially in the capture stage of CORI, whether that's capturing information in video form, in audio form, or simply in text form. I'd be wary of note-taking solutions that rely solely on transcription, as a verbatim transcript will only add to information overload without the tools to then help learners to refine their understanding. But many tools do specifically help with other stages of the CORI process too, especially in reducing information overload. So they may help learners at the organisation stage to manage the information found in their notes to create a library of knowledge. But what we found from our research is that many note-taking apps and solutions only really focus on the point of capture or the point of organise. But it's really important to look for tools that can help learners refine and integrate their understanding too, so that they can really get the benefit of note-taking for learning. And the good news is we've designed Glean with this in mind to specifically support the whole process. Well, I hope that's been helpful. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Great. So hopefully you can see how the CORI process tackles the problems I discussed earlier around the note-taker's dilemma and information overload, whilst also laying out some clear steps that a student can follow. Before we move into the next part of this, where Jenna's going to talk you through how to train a student on CORI and give you some really practical advice there, I'm just going to pause to allow anyone to ask any questions, if anyone wants anything clarifying that's been discussed so far. So I'll just pause briefly, either drop them into the chat or feel free to just shout out if you have a question as well.
By all means, raise your hand if you do want to come on live, or as Charles just mentioned, just unmute and ask your question there.
Cool. Well, I might push on just in the interest of time, but do keep those questions rolling in. There's definitely going to be time at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jenna now to take us through the training section of this workshop.
Thanks, Charles, and thank you everybody for joining today. Just next slide, please, Charles. There we go. So yeah, once again, thanks for joining everyone. I'm Jenna. So we've just been through the theory of the CORI process. Now let's take a look at how everyone here today can apply it in the classroom and teach students a note-taking process that will drive better learning outcomes. As always, when it comes to training, we have to start with the student. So my advice would always be, know your note taker before you start making recommendations. Learning is a very personal thing, and not everyone learns in the same way. It may be worth finding out whether your student is more of a visual learner, an auditory learner, kinesthetic learner, as this may help you mold your training to suit their needs. Most importantly, everyone's experience of note-taking is different. And as Charles mentioned, it is a very undertaught skill. And as I can see, many of you in the chat also agree with that. It's never really been taught throughout education. So you may find that your student arrives with misconceptions, knowledge gaps, or even no understanding at all when it comes to note-taking. So here are some really useful questions you can ask to get a better understanding of the student's approach to note-taking. So please feel free to have a quick read of all of the questions. Let us know if you have asked any of these to any of your students and what kind of responses you've received from your students. Please do let us know. It's always interesting to learn that knowledge from you yourselves. We've also just posted a link to a quiz in the comments. I believe Charles may be doing that now. It is a fun quiz, but also a really useful tool for students to become more aware of their note-taking practice. And please feel free to give it a go yourselves. You'll use this insight to adjust your training. So for example, if a student tells you that they never return to notes after class, you can focus on the organize and the refine stages of CORI. A student who tries to write everything down and feels like they're not really engaging in class can be encouraged to use a recording more effectively and return to their notes to add the detail later on. With that in mind, I'm going to take you through how I would recommend you train a student who is inexperienced at note-taking. This is probably the most useful plan I can share because most students will be inexperienced in at least some areas of note-taking. The capture stage is the most vital. We need to create buy-in for the value of having something to return to after class. So maybe start by getting them to hit a record button whenever they can. Then it's about what they should actually note down within the class. There will always be a temptation to try and write down absolutely everything that the teacher says with the fear of missing information and not really knowing what to focus on. Remember the react, respond, and record steps we discussed earlier. I would probably try to encourage your student to think about pausing, thinking about their reaction to what they have heard, and then to write down their reflection, safe in the knowledge that they can return to that recording later for any exact terminology or information that they may need. What does a good set of notes look like at this stage? From an hour's class, it may just be 10 key takeaways, or even 5 if you want to start at 5. Therefore, they can use these takeaways to reflect or follow up on later on. At this point, we're really after quality and learning to embed good notes and putting that into practice. We don't have to do everything straight away. We can pick the pace up on taking notes a bit later on. It's just getting students comfortable in the first place that matters. Your students will likely struggle to identify what key points are from what they're hearing. Information overload is a very real thing in class. I definitely, as a customer success manager here at Glean, have heard multiple institutions saying that students can get frustrated, can get really stressed as they do not know what to focus on, especially in an hour's worth of either recording or notes that they've taken from class. So one practical way that you can help students overcome information overload is by encouraging them to listen out for verbal cues in what a teacher may be saying. So some of these may be to sum up what I'd like to discuss, what we're going over, and you'll be able to see that I've put some of the verbal cues in this PowerPoint slide here. So please feel free to note them down and ask your students to listen out for these verbal cues, and it may be a good time for them to write a note down or at least build on that note later on. There are also non-verbal cues that students can look for as well, such as emphasizing a point by pointing, or tapping a desk. And there's no hiding from the fact that the capture stage in the CORI method can be overwhelming for new note takers. So I would always advise asking students to give it a practice before they try it for real within a lesson. Get them to watch a short video and write down some key points as they do. This video could be relevant to their course, but perhaps it may be even better if it relates to a hobby or an interest that they have outside of school, just as they may be more engaged at that point. Then talk through with them what they've written down and how they have identified them points. For new note takers, the organised stage is all about facilitating all important notes and reviewing of notes after class. You're not going to return to your notes if you can't find them, as Catherine had mentioned in her video. However, if your student is capturing notes in class, make sure they always give a title and some basic organisation or put them into categories. This could be the subject, the teacher's name, the date, whatever is going to be most useful for the student to go back to that and know what they are going back to ultimately. It may be helpful to position this as saving some time for the student and remind the student that they will thank themselves later when they go back to their notes and realise that everything is organised by the time exam season comes around. Just moving on to the refined stage, this is perhaps the most difficult to teach. A student generally has to be present in class, but often no one holds them accountable for returning to their notes afterwards. To build good habits, set your student a task to go back to their notes and then chat back in with them at a later point and ask them to come back with something specific. For example, you could ask them to research a word or a phrase that they heard but didn't understand, and come back and try and explain it to you. As well as creating some accountability for using their notes after class, this should also build an appreciation of the value of returning to the class content and refining notes to build understanding. And finally, integrate. As this is such a personal stage, it's important to work with the student here to understand how they like to study and what works for them best. If they don't already have a good study practice, I would advise probably starting simple with them. Ask them to create flashcards of the key points that they have now learnt from a particular class. And then if you have time, test them on it afterwards. See how much of that knowledge and information they have retained. This will demonstrate how they've been able to take that information in when they first heard it in class, how they have reflected on that information, refined it, and then retain that knowledge for later use. And I guess there we have it. In 4 simple steps, we've helped a student capture what is most important to them in class, organise their notes so that they can return back to them later, refine those notes by researching definitions, and integrate them into study by creating flashcards to help with information retention. So they are just a few of my recommendations for a new note taker. I'm just going to briefly look at how you can take things to the next level for a student who is already bought into the value of note taking. In terms of capture, my advice would be to get the student to add more detail whilst in class. This will depend on whether they have any processing barriers, but you can suggest that they start to add in definitions they find online, links to other content, or even possibly images if they're more of a visual learner. The more active they are, the more they will retain right from the get-go. They can also make their organisation more effective. If they are an advanced note taker, chances are they will produce lots of notes. Make sure that they are keeping their notes somewhere that is searchable. And if they are able to add labels to these notes, this really helps with quickly finding the content that they may need. If they're already in the habit of returning to their notes, get them to set aside specific time for this in their schedule. They may even want to set a timer to work on this without distraction for half an hour or so. For an advanced note taker, a completed set of notes after the refined stage will likely be very rich in content, including multimedia, links to other sources, very neatly organized under headings and key points labeled. So this moves me on to how can they integrate those notes into further study. There's a whole host of things that they can consider. For example, creating printouts, task lists, listening back to key points whilst they're traveling. The possibilities are endless. So just want to say at this point, thank you so much for listening so far. That's how you can teach any student to get more value out of class using the CORI method when it comes to note-taking. I'm just going to show you how Glean supports this process by demonstrating a few features. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, and we're going to jump straight into Glean. So as mentioned before, Glean is a note-taking tool online, and many institutions do use Glean and find it very effective, and we do receive some great feedback. But let us know your thoughts as I'm going through Glean now. So just focusing on that CORI method, I'm going to start off with capture. So first of all, a student would need to create a new event and therefore capture the lesson, their class that they are attending. So just to start with, I'm just going to import some PowerPoint slides. Many students usually have them at hand before their class starts. If not, not a problem. But I'm just going to import some PowerPoint slides. So once they have been imported, I'm going to start recording. As explained multiple times, this is all about capturing that information. So we can see here the audio is now recording, and this is picking up everything that I am saying. Different settings can be held, so if students are working remotely, Glean can also work for that too. But by taking notes whilst the audio is being captured, students have multiple options on how they want to do this. They can add notes freehand, so they can write anything they want into this bar here. Or if they want to flag something up as important, they can hit this label here, and it will actually show up in the audio bubbles where that piece of important audio is. Or if there's something they want to go back to review, so this may be something that their teacher has said that they're unsure about and they want to touch upon later, they can hit that review button and write a note next to that if they want to as well. But for the CORI method, as we've explained multiple times through this workshop, it is all about capture. So we really want students to engage with what's going on within their class and not have to worry too much about writing too many notes down or being distracted. So we do have this really cool feature in Glean, which is called lightning mode. And this just means that a student can sit with Glean open on their laptop or even on their phone if they wish. We do have a mobile app available. They can sit, really engage within what's going on, all of the information that's being provided to them, and they can use 1, 2, or 3 to either create a heading, something that's important, or flag something that's to review. So for example, I'm just going to press 2. And as we have it, we can see that's gone into our audio bubbles here. Everything is completely editable, but that is back at the refine stage, which I will touch upon a bit later on. But for now, let's just pretend we have completed our hour-long lesson and we want to stop this recording. So we've flagged up the bits of audio that we want to refer back to later when we do come to the refine stage and add a bit more context into our notes. But for now, the lesson has finished, but we need to make sure that we know exactly what this piece of information is that we have captured. So this moves me on to organised. A student can create an event name in here, and as explained through the workshop, this could be the name of the class, it could be the date, it could be what teacher it was who was teaching the lesson, anything that's going to be able to help a student refine and know what they're coming back to and what event they need to come back to. Another thing that a student can do at this point, now that the lesson has finished, they can add a task into their notes as well. So usually, maybe it may be throughout, but sometimes it's at the end. A teacher may say, oh, you have an assignment on X date. So a student can put this into their notes as well. So homework due X date, let's say, and post that into their notes. And that'll be there available for them to see, not only within this audio event, but also when they go back to the homepage. Going back to the homepage, this is where they will be able to review all of their tasks. Currently, we do not have time and date stamps that we can relate this to, but it's something that we are working on. But as you can see, we have a whole task list here from multiple audio recordings, different events that we've created within Glean from different classes. And therefore, students will know what tasks they have and therefore what they need to prioritize. Once again, remaining organized at all times. Students can then move that audio recording into a specific collection. So they have a choice to create up different collections, in other terms, folders, and they can just press Move Event. And if they already have that folder set up, they can select the correct class or the correct folder for that note to go into. So I'm just going to put mathematics for now. Then when I go into all of my collections, I can see my different lessons that I've had throughout the year, and each one of them will have the notes relevant to that specific topic in, like so. So once again, adding that structure and organization so that students always have somewhere to refer to if they need to refer back to notes. By labeling notes effectively, so giving it a correct heading, let's say, or putting into a correct collection, the student can then use the search bar and they can search any word that they want to. So I'm just going to put time because I know that we have some events in here that include that word time. And if they've labeled them correctly, they will be able to find them straight away. And by pressing on to the specific note or event that they need, it will take them directly there to that piece of information. So really, really key for them to keep organized when creating their notes within Glean or in general. Then we move on to refine. So a student will, they've left class, they've done their audio recording, they've captured that information. They then organize them so they know when they return to them later, they know where they're looking. Now they need to go back and refine. So they've logged back in the next day, let's say, and I'm just going to use this one here just because it's a bit of a longer audio recording than I've just demonstrated to you. So they can go in and they can see all of the notes that they have populated, so that what they flagged as important, what they have flagged to review, and they'll be able to see it in the audio here. A student then can press on that specific note and press play and listen to what was that piece of information that I thought was so important at this stage. So I'm just going to play this note now.
Specifically, the 1985 sci-fi novel Contact by Carl Sagan.
Like so. Then a student can actually add more context to these notes. So this was talking about a novel. They could even write down the name of the novel, a bit of context about that novel if they want to. Or if they've realized that they flagged something as important a little bit too early or a little bit too late, they can adjust the start and end of that audio as well, just making it really precise and once again, refining their notes. They can also extend these options, these notes out as well if they want a little bit more of a bigger screen and they're really embedding key knowledge within that note. Students, when they are refining their notes as well, say, for example, slide 4, or maybe slide 4 won't be a good example. Let me just find a slide that has quite a lot of text on. Slide 7. If they've been posting slides throughout, they can actually post the content that's on the slide into their notes. So posting the text from the slide, like so. Therefore, if they really wanted to, we can see this task here, read wormholes, time machines, and the weak energy condition. They can copy and paste that if they want to, completely take this out. Once again, everything within Glean is completely editable, and they can actually set that as a task if they want to, like so. Another great thing that a student can do within Glean is if they want to post a picture, they can. So if they need a certain diagram or a graph, let's say it's times tables, then they can search that specific thing like so, select the relevant image from the web and import that straight into Glean, and therefore they have it. Or alternatively, if they have a picture saved on their laptop, PC or phone, they can import that into Glean as well. So this may be handwritten notes or a graph or a diagram they have drawn themselves, and they can keep it all in one place. Students can also research and look up definitions. So if there's anything they were completely unsure about, they can search for a definition here within Glean, and therefore, once again, adding more detail and content into their notes for them to refer back to at any time. And probably last but not least at this point, we do have a cool feature, which is the transcription feature. It's favoured by some, not by others, but it is available if somebody would like to use that, if a student would like to use that. So for example, we have all of the audio here. If I wanted to convert that to text, I could. And instead of reading all of this context here, as that's not good note-taking practice, we don't want them to have absolutely everything in front of them. We want them to be able to learn to pick out the relevant things. Anything that they have flagged up as important or to review, they can select on that specific note, and it will show them exactly where in the transcript that piece of information is. Then a student can go along and post that into their notes if they want to. Once again, everything's completely editable, so they can add context or take context out here. If a student wants to test themselves, let's say, see how many notes they can do within a specific time frame, they can use the focus timer, where they can choose 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or 30 minutes to power through some study time. They can press start that timer, and once that timer has run out, it will let the student know how much work and how much refining notes they got done within that time. Really giving them that, spur on to do more, to see how much they can actually progress with their note-taking within that period of time. Just going out of that event, I'm going to go to a completely populated event. So in an ideal world, this is what we would love notes to look like. So once we've done the capturing, organizing and refining, we've added to our notes, we've added context, we've added extra information and definitions and things. We would love for our students' notes to look like this, or even for our own notes to look like this. Guaranteed I probably couldn't create as good notes as this is here. But once everything is done, a student will then want to integrate this information elsewhere. How can they use this information that they have captured, organized, and refined to really benefit from this? We do have a view on here, which is the reading view. So a student can go onto here and they can scroll through and have a look at all the notes they have populated, whether they have included slides or not, and seeing how much progress they have done. If they want to take this out of Glean, they can copy these notes to a clipboard and embed it into different areas of study that they have. So this may be Google Docs, this may be a Google Drive, anywhere they want or anywhere that they keep information. Or alternatively, students can print out these notes too. So this goes back to the flashcards. So students can use this information if they really want to create flashcards out of them, take it to their teacher, and really test themselves of how much they have learned and gained from that piece of information. How much knowledge have they retained from that piece of information? So that's just a few ways that students can use the CORI method through Glean. It is what we kind of base our whole platform on. We don't want it just to be an audio recording software. We do want it really to be a learning experience and process for the student. So I hope that has shown you and demonstrated CORI a little bit. We do welcome any questions if you have any. But for now, just going to pass back to Charles.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jenna. So yeah, I can see we've already had one good question come in. We'll answer that in a second. So yeah, do get your questions in on the chat. We'll be answering those and discussing those very soon. Just briefly though, we started this presentation off talking about grades and a process to create to improve grades. So let's just have a quick look at, does this process actually improve grades? Well, we recently surveyed over 400 students using Glean to see the impact of the tool and the scaffolded note-taking process on learning over one semester. And the results were astounding. Almost all the grades rose over the semester. 76% saw their grades rise and a further 15% maintained their GPA. Those who maintain the GPA tended to have started off pretty high anyway. 94% of those were above a 3. So the data does show that by following a scaffolded process like this, using technology that's designed to support learning does have a real impact on the learning outcomes. Whilst grades tend to grab the headlines, we know that's not the full picture. So it was great to see improvements in other areas as well. So we can see the vast majority of students said that the Glean method improved confidence, improved how they learn, and helped them better manage information overload. So before we get into some questions, let's just finish off by hearing from the most important people of all here, some students.
Even though I was making good grades in high school too, coming to college and having Glean, I think has made my stress like be much more reduced than what it was in high school. Because in high school, I was always worried that I was missing out information that was said in class. And now that I'm in college, I don't ever miss any information that was said in class. I'm more confident in class taking notes because I'm not worried about getting every little thing down. So I would say that makes me a lot better note taker because I'm more highlighting the main points and making this outline for me to look at while I'm listening to the lecture later versus trying to write down every single detail that is going on in class. And I'm not panicking because I'm not writing down all those details because, like I said, it's still there. I have a backup. I can re-listen to it later as many times as I want.
The big thing is I don't have to worry about writing every single little bit down. Obviously, I want to take notes on the important things so I can remember and learn throughout the lecture itself. But there's moments where I'm looking around and I'm seeing everyone scrambling to write things down. They're missing important bits and details from the teacher from my professor that they're not going to be remembering because they're too busy trying to copy down what's on the PowerPoint beyond the board, and they miss bits and pieces. I'm able to get all the important points. And one of my favorite features on Glean is to be able to the important feature. I can literally just write the notes also in the margins there, and it's just very easy to use.
When I'm trying to take notes during class, I have trouble multitasking, trying to write down my notes and also listen to what the professor has to say. Having the recordings there helped me revise my notes. Like maybe I misheard something or something was said too quickly. I can go back and replay whatever the professor said, and it just really helps in that sense.
Great. So wonderful to hear students talking about overcoming information overload and the note taker's dilemma there in their own words.
But at this point, Charles and Jenna, are we moving into the questions then?
Sorry, I realized I had muted myself there. I think I got a bit mixed up with the mute button. Yeah, in terms of where I left off. So I think, yeah, as I said, great to hear the students talking their own words there about the note taker's dilemma and overcoming the information overload. And yeah, exactly. Would be wonderful to spend the rest of the time that we have together today just getting into a discussion around some questions that have been raised. So carry on asking those questions. And the first one I think that came in was about how do you address situations when people are hesitant or flat out against being recorded? Do you have scripts available for students to practice for self-advocacy? So first instance, I'm going to throw this over to Jenna because I know this will be a problem or a question you've encountered before. But then I think it'd be great to get feedback from you guys as well. How have you guys worked through this this issue of people not wanting to record it. So first off, Jenna, is this something that you've come across before?
Yes, we don't come across it often, but there has been instances where we do receive a bit of pushback from, let's say, the faculty about being recorded. Usually how we address this is we have tons of resources and articles about different ways that this has worked, the benefit for students, how it has worked for other institutions, and also what it means to students' grades and how it can actually help students. In terms of scripts available for students to practice, within Glean itself, if you are referring to within Glean, please correct me if I'm wrong. We do have demo environments, so a student can go in and listen to a recording and have a practice, one, getting used to Glean, and two, highlighting what they think is important and then key areas of information and knowledge they may need to keep from a piece of recorded audio, let's say. But we do heavily encourage students to start off with something that they're interested in. So I do know there was a student who really loved Friends. I'm guessing we're all familiar with Friends and the multiple episodes. And every time a specific saying was said, they would flag that as important. And they really just use that to be able to listen out to certain phrases that is said, and therefore really learn what bits they need to pick out of certain audios. So please do let me know if that has answered your question. If not, Kristen, more than happy to discuss that further.
I think to develop that a bit further as well in terms of the recording issue, my understanding is there is often a difference between K through 12 and higher education. In higher education, the ADA will usually be enough to mandate the need for recording if it's judged to be there as an accommodation. But it's also not just about the law. I think, as Jenna said, that we have resources around speaking to faculty. In terms of some practical arguments that might be useful, one thing that we've seen work really well is to point out that students are recording, whether teachers or professors like it or not. Certainly at higher education, it's very normal for people to use their phones to record because people like to have something to go back to. So what we would always advise is engaging with the professors, faculty, teachers, and saying, it's better for everyone if recording is done through a tool that's designed for learning. So whether that be Glean or another piece of, education technology. And certainly in Glean, there's very limited options for sharing that recording outside of, personal use. So actually using technology that's been designed for that environment tends to actually protect the teacher and their IP better than just allowing students to record on the quiet using their phone. I'd love to hear more about if anyone has any examples of overcoming that barrier at K through 12 though, because I know that I believe that legislation can differ state by state as well, and I'm not quite sure what the differences are in Canada as well. Go on, Doug.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if anyone wishes to respond to that verbally, please just raise your hand or unmute your microphone. Also add it into the chat along with continuing to add your questions and comments. I know Wink has a hand raised. I'm not sure if Wink is wishing to respond to that or something else. But while we give others a chance to form their thoughts or add their stuff into the chat, maybe we'll move on to hear what Wink has to say.
I think this is all extremely interesting. My background is as a foreign language professor, and I put two links in the chat. One has to do with some online note-taker training that helps it. I think it would support what you're talking about here. It teaches people how to take effective notes. And as a disability services manager, we use this to train note takers for classroom support. But it's also useful in learning how to take good notes. Just saying that it's a resource that we could all benefit from. The other thing that I thought was very interesting is that everything that you're saying today, it seems like it's based on Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. And it has to do, I learned it because of language acquisition, but you're teaching it from the perspective of I guess you could call it note-taking acquisition. It uses the same theory. So here's a link if anybody is interested in learning more about how one acquires a new skill. It's a good support.
That's wonderful. This is why I love doing events like this, because it's this information sharing that's just so great. So thank you for posting those. And you're absolutely right. I guess one of the underlying messages around CORI is that we're not trying to just teach people how to note down points in class. This is note taking for learning. It's exactly as you said. It's about acquiring skills, acquiring knowledge, building those connections. That's what we think is so important, and what we think is so often missed in the note-taking process, because people get very stuck in that capture stage around, I must create a record, and it's not thinking about how you're then going to go on to use that in the learning process. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing those resources. I'll definitely be having a read through those. We also had a question or a comment from Linda saying that you'd like to see examples that we've created for university level courses, which are much more detailed and in-depth topics. We can definitely dig out some examples. What I would say actually though is that the majority of organizations or institutions that use Glean and use the CORI method are actually higher education. That's, I know, Jenna, that'll be the majority of the people that you work with. So yeah. I don't know if you've got any anything to share around, how it's used in those slightly more information heavy lecture scenarios, to how CORI and Glean can be useful there.
So really, within more of the heavy, especially STEM subjects, we do have a lot of institutions who are heavily, or students that use it who do take the STEM subjects. I wouldn't say it works particularly any different. Sometimes the information overload, as we've discussed before, may be greater, purely just for the fact of, them kind of subjects. You're always talking theories, different formulas and things like that. But I wouldn't say it works any different. I do think the CORI method can work for any type of information, in terms of the structure is there for a student to use it regardless of that content. Maybe completely wrong in saying that, and I'd love to know the thought process, behind the comment, but I've never heard from any institutions I've worked with that the, university, the level of a course affects the way that Glean is used, so to speak. I don't know if you have, Charles.
No, well, as I would say, actually, I would say that it's probably designed as a use case. Higher education and the lecture scenario was probably the starting point for a lot of the development on CORI. I've just posted a couple of they're from our blog, so definitely explore some of the other articles, but these two came to mind. A couple of blogs around our advice on firstly staying focused in college classes, and then also a more in-depth look about what to actually write in your lecture notes. We did cover some of it earlier, but that'll give you a much more in-depth, some examples of how to structure notes in a lecture scenario as opposed to more of like a school level classroom. But yeah, certainly a lot of the people I've spoken to, it's used in a higher education scenario. I know, Doug, that's a higher education scenario that you're familiar with it in as well. So yeah,
keen to hear the feedback on that. Yeah,
the principles would be more or less the same. I think it's a process that can be applied in anywhere that you're needing to process spoken information for learning.
It'd be interesting. Sorry, Charles.
Sorry, go on. I was just going to say I was going to look for further questions. So definitely, yeah, carry on, Doug.
Yeah, I'd be interested if Linda wishes to add anything further to the chat, or come on by unmuting and comment any further on that, because it is something that I can relate to a bit of what Linda is saying, as well as same thing as I can relate to Jenna and Charles, what their response is. And for me personally, the students that I work with, and even thinking back to my time in a higher ed situation, I didn't have the luxury of Glean. If I had, or even audio note taker, but if I had of trying to put myself back in that position, is I feel that the missing component, and I'm not sure if this is what Linda's getting at, or maybe I'm off as well here, but the missing component, I think, is that people aren't, they're not doing the work. They're not going through the note-taking process for learning, as has been mentioned here. They're just capturing. And that's why when Charles and I originally talked and about bringing us up to date about Glean and what Glean can do, and I said, we need to look at the actual note-taking and note-making process and use Glean as one of many tools. And that's why what we brought Charles and Jenna here today to do is, through this workshop, is to investigate and look at that, because I think that's the part that's the Grand Canyon that we all keep finding ourselves falling into when we try to get from the beginning of capturing to the end of why do I bother, from the student's perspective. So again, Linda, I'd be interested and quite happy if you'd like to unmute and join us with some thoughts on that, or anybody else. And just on that note, anybody has any other questions or comments, please just continue to put them into the chat here or unmute.
I guess I would add, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's where the more that we can do to teach good note-taking practice as early as we can, the better. And I think as Jenna mentioned when she was kind of working through how to engage with someone that isn't experienced with note-taking, trying to build in those cycles of accountability. So it's not just saying the student has to be present in class and take some notes there. It's building that rhythm of, I'm going to expect you to have processed that information and come back to me with some new information, a definition, something that you have learned as a result of that. I'm going to test you on something, because I think that what often happens is the feedback cycles are far too long in education. The class happens, and then maybe, certainly in higher education, it could be months down the line that is then an assessment happens. And by that point, the student hasn't kind of built in that rhythm. They're not used to recalling the knowledge that they have learned from class. So I think that's probably harder to do at higher education. But I think if we can try and address that earlier, building those cycles, we create that good practice of actually using notes and understanding what that information is there for, if that makes sense.
I reading between the lines on what you just said, Charles, students won't be happy with that, because that would involve more earlier on in the term, more and more frequently throughout is quizzes and tests.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that was the other thing that popped into my mind, and it'd be interesting to get feedback on. Is there a motivation kind of side to this as well that we need to probably discuss, like a kind of instilling the reason for this, the benefits of actually, good note taking. Maybe that's also like worth considering. I've seen Linda has responded.
Yeah, Linda just actually popped out of the meeting as well, unfortunately.
Okay, so I think she was. Oh, hang on. I think was someone saying something.
Yeah, that was just me. I was just going to say, in response to Linda's comment, I've actually had this question before with our product team. And the thought process behind it is, since we use that as a demo event for students and it's available for students to take a look at, and, like I said, as a demo environment within Glean, the students who are more fearful about note-taking or more conscious that they're not very good at it, is we don't want to scare them away or make them think it's harder. We want to ease them into that note-taking experience and kind of starting from the basics, because whether they've learned it in, throughout high school or anything, or they're going into university. As we've explained, 9 times out of 10, not many people have much note-taking experiences, so we don't want to throw them into the deep end just yet. That is the feedback that I've had from our product team, and it's definitely one that is on our radar in terms of what would be more meaningful to different audiences. But I hope that's, I think Linda popped back in halfway through the response.
Yeah. Yeah. So what you're saying there, Jenna, is that time travel is it's a generic. What I think you're saying is it's a generic example that for those of us who are old enough to remember Sonus and Audio Note Taker, and it superseded what was it, tea drinking, I think, and moved on, and I certainly would second Linda's comments here about some further higher ed examples, maybe as alternatives that can be looked at from your website or something, because I do, when from a higher ed perspective, working as an assistive technologist in a university, thankfully I don't have a lot of STEM type courses that I support students in. It's very difficult for me in a liberal arts area to be able to teach them note-taking skills, because everything is so generic. They've got to understand and rationalize and put together all these concepts and be able to apply that knowledge. So being able to take notes from there, if there were some other higher ed oriented examples, STEM included, as well as non-STEM, I think it might help me be able to actually be able to show and have something that these students can relate to, because it's been mentioned in a number of different ways today, is that what are good notes? Like, does anybody really know? And I get that question asked more than I can count. Is, well, what are my notes supposed to look like? Or when I do a follow-up with a student and I look at their notes with them and help go over how they're using the program, their question is either it's a question or a statement right off the bat is my notes are awful. I know they are. Or what are they supposed to look like? I know they're not right. So having those examples, I think, would certainly be helpful.
Yeah.
I think that's great feedback. Thank you. I guess what I'm kind of hearing there is a bit of choice over, and a few different examples might be very helpful.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So I don't want to speak on behalf of Linda, but that's my personal input. And I know Linda was popping in and out of the meeting, so I'm not sure if she's having some internet problems or had another meeting to go to. So anyways, and again, I don't want to monopolize the entire meeting here. So let's move on. If anybody, please continue to add the questions, comments into the chat, or raise your hand or unmute, and we'll get you on if you want to ask by voice. And sorry, just I think we're caught up in the chat. There was a couple questions that came to my mind. So just while we're giving people some time to add some other information in there, if there are some outstanding questions, I'm curious, Jenna and Charles, if either or both of you can show us. I know we're here to learn note taking, but and the philosophy and the theory behind that, and how, and yeah, Glean is one of those tools that sure we can certainly apply it and make use of the Glean tool, but Glean's got that very unique option of putting the slides in. But when students don't have those slides right up front and they've got it afterwards, we teach them the CORI process. We get them doing that during the class without slides. It's obviously not as easy, and it's more difficult for them to do. But at the same time, how can we then, first from a technical perspective, somebody take the screen back, please, and show us how we can import those slides and line them up afterwards, if you're able to do that, on putting you both on the spot there, I hope. And secondly is, how do we wrap the CORI process around that after the fact?
Yeah. So I'll just jump back into Glean. I hope you can all see my screen. It's not going to be a very good example because I'm not going to have a lot of notes or audio to go from just from this example. But basically, at any point, a student can stop and start that recording. And let's just say I'm just going to try and make it run as much as possible. I can't use a previous example because they'll have slides on. Let's just say for now that this is done. This is our hour's worth of recording. At any point, slides can be imported. So for example, if I just press import slides, and once again, this is going to be a really rubbish example just because I don't have one set up without slides. But all that would really need is you can select certain points of audio or notes that have already been taken. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to show this, unfortunately. Actually, let me see if I can go back into a different event and take them slides out.
Well, I didn't know we could take slides out.
No, do you know, in all honesty, I don't think we can, unfortunately.
If you go back to one you made, like that short recording,
Mm-hmm.
and then if you hit post slide, will that not create?
It'll post the slide, but basically, the way it would happen is, and I'm sorry that you're going to have to imagine, pretend these slides aren't here, and this is just our notes. If we then imported our slides in afterwards, we would then have to select a note like so. Press recording. Select a note like so. This one here. And press post slide. I'm not going to be able to show it, unfortunately. I don't think it's no, it's not going to play ball with me. It can be done. Unfortunately, I can't show you, but it's basically pressing on a specific note and pressing post slide, and it will put that heading of that slide above that note that you've selected. So if you've got populated notes already, it's just you selecting certain points of the notes that you've already created and posting the slide against them notes, and then it will actually set it out in the audio as well. Sorry if that's not explained very well. More than happy to send a video across of how to do that afterwards, but it's almost going to be.
Yeah.
It's going to take a while.
Is that something that is in your training manual, or not manuals, the training portal, or in the help files?
Yeah, so we do have a help guide which does have information on the PowerPoint slides, so all questions involving that. So when you add them after, how to actually embed them back into your notes and refine them notes so that it all matches up correctly. I'm going to see if I can get it up for you now, actually. So if anybody has any further questions in the meantime, please feel free.
I think the second part of your question was how to build that into the CORI process, so how to add in the slides, how adding in slides later. I was thinking about it as Jenna was talking, and I think there's a couple of options. You could either frame that as part of the organize stage, i.e. it's about, you know, how do I create a structure within my notes? So I've got my recording, I've got some reflections in there, let me add a structure. Or it could even be a part of the refine stage. So especially if you're sort of adding slides in, but you're also adding images in, you're kind of enriching those notes with more content. And especially if you're then going to use the extract text and slides option, that for me feels much more part of the refine stage. It's about adding information to that that set of notes.
Right, I've got an article here that I'm just going to post within the chat. Everyone can feel free to. There's some GIFs on there, so some moving images showing you how that is done. So please feel free to share with students or colleagues, whoever may benefit.
I've seen.
Thanks for that link, Jenna.
No problem.
I've seen a question from Julie here saying, providing a permanent free subscription for assistive technology specialists, I guess that is, to access for live demonstration purposes to individual students could further support the absence of HE specific resources. So we do actually offer this. So I'm going to post a link now. It's just to a Google form, but this is actually quite a new thing. So we've always offered out, you know, free accounts to those that are demonstrating it or making recommendations of assistive technology. We've just launched something called the Evaluator account. So this gives you free access again, but it also allows you to give out 60-day free trials to students or clients or anyone else that you're giving it out to. So if you are making recommendations for a tool and you'd like to get hold of Glean for free, fill out this form with a bit about, you know, your role in supporting students, and we can get you set up with a free account, which does then allow you also to let your clients and students try that as well.
Perfect. That's a big help, Charles. And thank you for asking that question, Julie. And I'm wondering if that form was designed in preparation for today's webinar or workshop, knowing that we might be asking for that, or was it just total coincidence, Charles?
It was a coincidence, in fact. So a bit more context. We've recently made it possible. So previously, if you wanted to buy Glean, if you were a university or a school or a college, you could buy kind of like an institutional package or our top tier Glean for Education package. This was if you've got lots of users, you want to give it out to lots of users, you want the administrative tools, all that good stuff. Or you could buy it on a monthly subscription. So the gap was if you were an individual, or you know, you were making a recommendation for an individual, but you needed like an annual license because of funding, then there wasn't an option for that. So we've actually just launched annual licenses. We're also looking into multi-year licenses. So say 3-year, 5-year, that's for the future. And so this evaluator license was actually a part of that project because we recognized there was a need for people to be able to let their students try it out before they decided whether it was the right tool for them. You can't just sort of get people to buy a tool, you know, and trust that that's definitely going to be what they want to use for the next 1 to 5 years. So it's good timing, basically. But yeah, it's a part of a broader piece that we're trying to do to make the tool more accessible to people like yourselves.
Perfect. It's wonderful to have available, and like you say, great timing, Charles. It might be an opportunity right now to mention to those in Canada that there is a Canadian portal for Glean in order to be able to purchase annual licenses at Canadian prices, and that through our slightly different funding models that we have up here. So because I was super prepared for today, I didn't. Oh, thank you, Charles. I was going to say I should have looked that link up to have it, but Charles has it, so he's just added it to the chat. So those who aren't aware of it for Canadian educational institutions, please make sure that you use that. That took a lot of hard work on the old Sonus and audio note taker team, and a few of us key people here in the AT world in Canada to get put in place a number of years ago, and it's. Feedback to you and your team there at Glean and Sonus is it's very, very much appreciated and very helpful to use.
You're very welcome, and we really would love feedback on you know, other ways that we can make it easier for you to access the tool as well. Sometimes we're not always aware of specifics around funding. You know, let us know. We'll happily work with you guys to make it work. Perfect.
And I just want to go back in the chat. Julie had added in, just in addition to both Linda and myself, our request for relevant examples for higher ed. Julie's suggesting that some further support for rationales that encompass the legal duty to accommodate, and with respect to audio recording and the student advocacy focused responses, just those would be, she's saying those would be enormously helpful tools and go a long way for us to be able to support the product when we're presenting it, the Glean product over other tools. So if you providing that feedback and request for you there, and I would just emphasize and separate out the self-advocacy focused responses, because sometimes those that we're dealing with in the assistive technology world and the disability world, as we can well imagine, they don't necessarily have the advocacy skills that they might wish they did, and it's intimidating with a power imbalance. So if we can not only have the rationale for us that says, hey, we're colleagues, speaking to other colleagues, but also something that can maybe help put some words in the hands of the students that then have to approach those professors.
For sure. Let me. I've taken a note myself to dig something out on that. I know that we've had a lot of certainly in the higher education space, a lot of discussions in the past around advocacy. So I'm sure there's something that we can share with that. I'll share it with you, maybe Doug, and then we can send it out to the attendees.
Yeah, perfect. And the resources that are coming out of this webinar, the slides that Jenna and Charles had, as well as these links, they will be with the replay and such. So we can definitely add that into the replay there as well. So Holly has added in here a question about the fact that it was mentioned earlier to be cautious of note-taking tools that rely solely on transcription, and curious, were you referring to Scribes, Cornell Notes, or maybe you can give some more input into that? I think it was you who mentioned that, Jenna.
Yeah, to be fair, correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, but I don't think we're not referring to any other companies in particular. It's more just the way that we view note-taking in terms of a process of the CORI method, which we've touched on multiple times. With a whole piece of transcription, a whole piece of wording, it can, or feedback that we've received, it can lead to lazy note-taking because everything's there in front of a student. They don't necessarily have to engage with the lesson. They just have the notes afterwards. They have it, they can read it whenever they want to read it. Yes, that's great, but it's not helping them learn what piece of information should they highlight or flag as an important piece of information that they need for later on. So as much as, be cautious of note-taking tools that are solely transcription, no companies in particular to be cautious of, just the actual act of reading a transcribed piece of text rather than taking notes from an audio or listening even in person.
Yeah, completely. I think Scribes are mentioned in there, which I guess could maybe be like peer note takers. I correct me if I'm wrong if that's not the right assumption, but we sometimes refer to provided notes to cover like peer notes and transcription. What we just are cautioning against is often the first thing that a student will request is a transcript. Sometimes not necessarily not necessarily from a point of like laziness. Sometimes that's just the only thing that they're like aware of that could help them. And transcription has its place for sure. Like you can now access it through Glean, but it's not a substitute for that process of listening, interacting, deciding what's important for you as an individual to take away from class. You're kind of just, if you rely entirely on a transcription, you're kind of just moving the problem of information overload from an auditory problem to one that you now have to read. It's still far too much information to actually be useful to anyone. It's got to still go through that process for learning.
Okay. And just kind of on a somewhat related note, Chris has added into the chat just thanks for the presentation, and that Chris is a huge fan of Glean, but is also stating that it would be great if the transcription feature that Glean has recently introduced would be available for non-Glean for education licensing models as well. And I just want to point out there that the fact is the transcription that we're talking about that's available in Glean, obviously, as you just mentioned, Charles, it's just an endless text, but it's not intended to be used for that. And that's where it's a unique way of taking just an endless thing of text. So it's a valuable tool, but as Chris is alluding to here, it would be nice if it was able to be available without the Glean for Education license model.
Absolutely. I guess just to quickly explain the reasoning for that. So we are partnered with another company to provide that transcription. So there is an additional cost to us, which is why it's only available currently in our top tier package. I will say though, we are actively looking into how we can offer it in more packages. So I can't give any specifics on that, unfortunately, but we hope for it not to always be a part of just a part of a premium subscription, because there's many instances of whether it's because you're an institution not on Glean for Education, or even just because you're an individual user, that you would need or want access to transcription. So yeah, we definitely hear you on that one, and we are working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Great. All right. It's good to know that that's being considered. And that's, so thanks for raising that, Chris, and thanks Charles and the team at Glean for looking into that. I've not seen any other comments or questions in the chat. I just want to, as we wrap up here today, I appreciate those who are still with us. This was planned for an hour and a half, and we didn't know if it was going to be less than an hour and a half or if it was going to be more, because it was a workshop. So I respect the fact we've gone overtime. We've lost people who hopefully will be able to pick up in the replay. But just please do add your final questions or thoughts into the chat, and or raise your hand or unmute if you want it to come on by voice. And I had two real quick questions or suggestions, wondering if they're on the product development map for Glean. Are we going to ever be able to get the read aloud ability for the notes and the text that comes extracted from the slides like we had in Audio Note Taker?
All highly requested audio note taker features are always considered, because we know people absolutely loved that platform for many reasons, and I'll never knock it as a platform. It's brilliant. So they're always considered. In terms of the near future roadmap, it isn't something that we're prioritizing, but I can say it's something that we're aware that is wanted and requested. The more people shout about certain features or request certain features, the kind of higher up on a priority list different features are, because we really do want to give you what you think will benefit you and your students. So definitely feedback that it's something that is requested once again. Charles, don't know if you've got anything to add.
I think it dropped out for me. Was it the read aloud feature that you mentioned?
Yeah, the read aloud of the text that's either in the notes and or the extracted slide text. You'll have that read aloud.
You probably are well aware of this, but in case anyone isn't, one thing I would suggest, if that kind of feature is really important, Glean, being a web tool, will work with text-to-speech plugins. So that would also be a workaround. I appreciate it's not embedded within the tool, but part of the reason for moving to an online tool with Glean was we wanted to be able to, for people to access and use it with their preferred plugins, whether that be accessibility or any other kinds of plugins. So that is one workaround potentially there as well.
It's certainly a good strategy and suggestion, Charles. I'm curious, is there a list posted somewhere of Chrome extensions that have been tested to work properly with Glean?
That is a very good question. I would say most will, because Glean effectively is just a website. So I would imagine that it's more unusual for them not to work. If they work with modern websites, Glean's built to be up to that standard. So I'll definitely look to see if we do have one. But I would say assume that they do work with it if they work with other modern websites.
Okay. All right. And are we getting the ability to export or extract audio from the event so we can use those audio tracks separately?
Yes. So in terms of, I think it's both actually, importing and exporting. Let me just double check which one it is that's coming first. Bear with me. This was another thing relating back to Audio Note Taker. A lot of pushback from students was the fear of losing all of the audio and notes that they'd created in Audio Note Taker, and not being able to have that within Glean and losing that license. So it's something that we did take quite seriously, as we want to make that as easy as possible. It is importing audio is in progress. So that will be getting worked on until, I don't have a time frame of when that will be available, but I can't imagine it being this semester, in all honesty. So that is importing audio into Glean, and then we will be looking at exporting it out.
Okay, great. So we're definitely, I haven't seen any other input into the chat here, and I haven't seen any other unmuted microphones or raised hands. So just, I think we are coming to a close here, Charles, Jenna. As we do, is there anything that you wanted to add in summary or as we're wrapping up?
I think just to say thank you so much, especially everyone that's stuck on. I think we're, what, 25 minutes nearly over now, so really appreciate that. But I've really enjoyed the discussion as well. And yeah, it doesn't have to stop here either. Do get in touch with either myself or Jenna or anyone else at Glean. Whether it's to discuss getting access to the tool or just you have questions or advice for us, we're always looking to chat.
100%. And I've not been at Glean long, actually. I joined Glean about 4 months ago, and all comments and discussions, positive, negative feedback, anything is more than welcomed. I guess we're all learning together about these different things. So please do reach out at any point. More than happy to help with anything we can help with. And we really do like to take your feedback on board. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time, especially on a Friday.
All right, this is how the N.O.A.T family and other assistive technology professionals, this is how we spend our Friday afternoons and get ourselves relaxed and ready to go out into the weekend. It's a regular occurrence for us. For the two of you coming to us from the UK, obviously there's a time difference, so it's definitely dinner time, if not bedtime. I guess it's almost bedtime for you. So very much appreciate the fact that you've been able to be here today and bring this knowledge and all the research that goes on behind it. Bring that all to us, share it with us, and stay overtime. It's very much appreciated from all of us, I know, as well as those who will be taking part in watching the replay. And the fact that what boils down to for me coming out of this is the fact that note-taking is for learning. It's not just for capturing. That's only the one step, and we've got to get people moving past that. And once we do, who knows? Maybe they'll turn into teachers and actually teach the students note-taking skills for the future. That's what we can hope as a dream. So just as we do wrap up here, again, thank you both Jenna, Charles, and the entire team at Glean. I know there's a lot of people involved in the putting together of this material. It's been fantastic to be able to hear a lot of the theory and have this presented to us, not just from a demonstration of how you use Glean, but how we can actually teach note-taking skills and then, yes, apply it to Glean. Glean gives us so many of those opportunities to be able to take technology and match it to that CORI process. So again, thank you very much for being here. You guys at Glean, previously Sonocent, you've supported the assistive technology profession, accessibility community, us here at the Network of Assistive Technologists. You've supported us throughout over many years. We welcome you back anytime so that we can find out what's going on, and any workshops that you're wanting to help lead so that our members and the AT community can boost our skills in note-taking. We're happy to have you back anytime. We're looking very forward to seeing what the future holds for Glean and all of those features that we've requested today. Every single one of them we expect by the end of the month. Just joking. But and more. We're definitely, we're looking forward to what's coming in the future. We're excited to see what you guys are doing with the product. So again, thank you very much for being here today. And lastly, for everyone here today, thanks for joining us. And remember, you can't spell education without AT.